All right, so I'd like to use some of the G chords we were working on to build our triads to show how members of the chord can be sort of arranged in a bit of a flexible manner. What we've been working on so far is when the notes are as close together as they can possibly be, and this is what we refer to as closed position. So a closed position G major triad, kind of like we heard before, is going to sound like this. But that's not the only way that these members of the chord can be stacked. As you can see off to the right here, there are other ways of kind of taking the members of the chord and sort of, stacking them or arranging them in a little bit different way. So what you'll notice is that, so I've color coded, by the way, I've kept my root blue in this case, my third is red, my fifth is brown, and so you can kind of see how they travel in different positions. What you'll notice that I've done in these examples is I've kept the root of the chord on the bottom. There are ways of stacking chords to where a different member's on the bottom, and we'll get to that when we talk about chord inversions. But in this case, we're going to keep the root as the lowest sounding note, no matter how I arrange the other two notes of the chord. And that's really critical to understanding how chords are identified. Even though we often, see them presented in closed position like this, the only kind of a rule in terms of the chord, the way it appears here, is that the root in this case really does need to be the lowest sounding note. But as far as the third and the fifth, they don't necessarily have to be stacked kind of in that order. The third can be stacked higher than the fifth, as we have here. Similarly, there's no rule saying that the third has to be as close to the root as possible. It can kind of be separated apart. And so these examples here show what we call open position. And one way to think about open position is it's sort of like, skipping the next possible member of a chord or another one or more possible members of the chord before you voice another member. So we have the root here in the G. We could theoretically put a B here for the third, but instead we've skipped and we've gone to a D here, right? So that's the next highest sounding member of the chord, right? And then the third we've gone ahead and thrown to the top of the stack, and that's totally fine. What you see here is sort of a variation of what we had back over here, where the third and the fifth are both kind of in that order above the root, but there's lots of distance between the root and the next member of the chord. This still qualifies as well as open position because of the way the notes are spread out, okay? So again, we have a closed position G major chord here. We have one example of an open position G major chord here. And another example of an open position G major chord here. So in terms of identifying these chords, all of these chords are versions of what we can call a G major chord. It's just that the third and the fifth are sort of arranged in a little bit different order. And as long as they're above the root, as long as the root is the lowest sounding note, then we can certainly identify this as a G major chord, and what we'll later on learn is called root position. So that's, one example of open and closed position when the chord appears on a single staff. There are other ways that it can appear when you're using multiple staves, which we'll take a look at now. All right, so now here we see a G minor chord voiced on kind of this grand staff here, right? So we're using a treble on the top, bass on the bottom, and then we have the members of the chord, which are kind of split between these two staves, yeah? And you'll notice that I have more notes in both cases. I have more notes on the treble line than I do on the bass line. This is an example of what we call keyboard texture. So what we have here, if you look closely, you'll notice that even though this root here is on a different staff, the next possible member for the G minor triad, if it were on the bass clef, would be right here, the B flat, and this would be B flat below middle C, which is present, it's just here on the treble staff, right? So we still have kind of closed position in that the G is here, the next possible member B flat is here, and then the fifth is here. And you'll notice that I have another G sitting here. So I've done what's called doubling in terms of the root. This doesn't change the identity of the chord. The fact that a member of a chord can appear multiple times, like in different octaves or different voices, that doesn't change the fundamental nature of the chord, as long as within this kind of bundle of notes I have G as a root, D as a fifth, and B flat as the third, and no other notes. If no other notes are present and it's just those three, even if some of them appear more than once, this is still a G minor chord, and because they're all kind of packed together here, this would be a G minor chord in closed position. That's different than this version here. Well, you'll see I still have a G as the lowest note, but it's an octave lower, right? The fact is, the fact remains that it's still the lowest sounding note of the members of the chord here. So here's our root, Here's our fifth, and now our third in this case is voiced on top. Doesn't change the nature of the chord. The fact that I have a G, a D, and a B flat, that's all I need, those ingredients to constitute a G minor chord. And in this case, we have it in open position. So here we are again with the grand staff, this time voicing a G augmented triad. And you'll notice in this example, I've got two notes on the treble line. I've got two notes on the bass line, same thing over here. And this is what we refer to as soprano, alto, tenor, bass texture, or SATB, which we'll become very familiar with going forward in our study of theory, particularly when we begin voice leading. So in this case, check this out. In both examples, again, you see that I've doubled the root of the chord. That's okay. That doesn't have any effect on the identity. The fact that I have the root at least once, that I have the fifth of the chord, and that I have the third of the chord, and again, no other notes. If other notes were in here, then it would change our analysis a bit. But it's just limited to those three notes, even though one of them is doubled. That all by itself makes this a G augmented triad. Same thing over here. I've got a root way down here, a doubling of the root way up here. Here I've got the third right there, and then I've got the fifth right there. This then is open position. This is closed position because, again, check this out. I've got my root here. The next available member is right there as I go up. As I go up to the next available member, I'm going to be looking for a D sharp above middle C, which is exactly what I have here voiced on the treble line. And then above that, I've just gone ahead and doubled the root again. But again, it's the next available member as I ascend. So that makes this all closed position. And the fact that I've got spacing between members of the chord in this example here makes this one an example of open position.